Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in Denison Consulting's next Era of Manufacturing webinar. We have some exciting information to share with you today. As many of you know, Denison Consulting does a lot of work with clients all over the world. In fact, we've worked with more than 8,000 clients over our 25 years and had more than 5 million people participate in our various surveys. And from all of this, we know without a doubt that successful business performance is only possible with a strong, healthy culture. We see it all over and over again, repeatedly in every industry. And so through various analysis in different industries in our new series, we wanted to bring some of this information to you. And so with that, we welcome you to the next era in manufacturing and some of the insights that we found in our analysis. I'm Katrina Clear, and I'll be your host for today. We have an exciting agenda ahead. Let's see if I can make this work. There we go. We're going to talk about a few different topics here around culture being the best weapon against labor shortages, which is top of mind for so many of us. And we'll talk a little bit more about quality and safety and how culture plays a role there. And then, of course, digital transformation. So our structure of our conversation will have Q&A after each one of these topics. So if you have a question that you think of, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. You should see it down at the bottom of your screen in the menu bar there. And you can just type your questions into the Q&A and we'll answer them toward the end of each of these sections. And we hope you find the content interesting. I am joined by two esteemed colleagues who have lots of expertise in this space and are eager to share it with you. Austin Adams, who's our VP of Research and Analytics here at Denison Consulting, and Jay Richards, who is our VP of US Business Development and who has worked in the manufacturing sector for a very long time and has lots of good stories of successes and things to consider in that space. So our dynamic duo of data and analytics and client engagement and real-world examples should serve you well as we go through our time today. Remember, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. And with that, I will turn it over to Austin for us to get started. Austin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Just broadly, as Katrina had mentioned, we've seen the connection between culture and performance and particularly profitability in every industry. But what drives profitability and kind of the role that culture plays looks a little bit different in every industry. For example, within the manufacturing industry, we see that there's about a 38% gap between profitability in companies with strong cultures and those with weak cultures. The profit margin is really driven by effects of culture on safety, quality, and retention. You can see in some of our data here on the right side, kind of some of those key differences when looking at EBITDA growth as well as revenue growth. And you can see actually decline for those organizations that have those weaker cultures who lack strategic clarity, who lack customer focus, for example. Versus on the right side, you can see pretty impressive growth in both areas where culture is much more vibrant. People are much more connected to what's going on, much more plugged into the company's direction itself. So today what we want to do is really explore some of these key areas and get deeper into some of the nuances of kind of the culture and profitability narrative as it exists within the manufacturing industry. The first one that we'll move into here is labor shortages and how culture can really be a weapon against labor shortages. Labor shortages are an incredible pressure right now on the industry. Not only is the manufacturing industry itself growing, but it's also needing more and more skilled labor that forces the industry to compete with other industries in the labor market that it hasn't before. At the same time, younger workers now prioritize company culture on par with salary and benefits when they search for a job, making culture a really important component of attracting that top talent. Once you're hired, employees in a strong culture are twice as likely to stay past their first year compared to those in a weak culture. This means that a strong culture filters top talent into your company at the hiring process, but it also keeps them there at the onboarding process, really emphasizing the importance of culture as a tool to building the right workforce that you need. When failure to attract couples with inability to retain, hiring and onboarding costs skyrocket, which erodes your profit margins. And so it's through retention, but also attracting the right talent and doing so efficiently, using culture as a mechanism to attract, that ultimately improves profitability for organizations on both of these ends. Moving into the next slide, talking about just kind of what are some of those key components of a culture that attracts and retains employees. Our data shows that there are 4 key components of culture that really matter in this space, specifically within the industry. Strategic alignment, having clear direction and goal alignment, agreeing on what the goals are that get us into that direction. Gives a purpose to employees. It boosts motivation, but also productivity, and creates an environment that also boosts retention. People who are motivated and excited by the direction of the company want to be there to see that play out. Business environment consistency. Stability and predictability in daily operations is a huge component of reducing workplace stress, which creates an environment people want to work in. Consistent and effective operations, leadership, and management are how you facilitate that consistency. But by far, one of the biggest drivers of attrition that we've seen kind of across the board tends to be an inconsistent, unpredictable business environment that drives workplace stress. Innovation and learning, continuous improvement and learning opportunities keep employees engaged and also feeling like they're in control of their work environment. You may have an inconsistent business environment. You may lack strategic alignment, but if you feel progress, that you're working towards those things and you're involved in that process, you're much more likely to stay at the company and to feel motivated towards achieving those outcomes with the rest of the workforce. The last of them being flexibility. Even non-telework roles, especially in this industry, expect higher flexibility today. That would be potentially compressed work weeks, shift swapping, flexible hours. Flexibility, when planned effectively, not only has been shown to boost overall productivity, but also reduces workplace stress. It allows people more time to be with their families. It allows people more flexibility in the day to achieve both personal and professional goals within the time that they have. Again, not only an important component of retention and making sure that people are happy in their roles, but an incredible attractor as well. People are chasing flexibility today in the market, and so creating that within your organization is incredibly important. We're going to transition now into kind of digging into these topics a little bit deeper through some Q&A, where we really want to kind of, instead of going deeper into some of the content we've published in articles through this campaign, really get into some of the nuances around these ideas. And so we'd love to take a moment to pause for Q&A specifically around labor shortages, retention, and attraction.
Here we go. Let me back up a slide here too. So if anybody wants to read this in a little bit more detail, these were some really interesting findings, I thought, and particularly the notes around flexibility, because I think a lot of people don't think about flexibility as much in a sector in an industry like manufacturing, which feels very location dependent and kind of fixed in many ways. There's other industries like that too. I thought that was really interesting that it surfaced as an item. Let's see if some more questions come in here in a minute.
Yeah, and I love the whole thing around just bringing people in, getting the labor pool out there interested in you. Because when I went out for my first job, I just looked in the classifieds, right? My kids don't do that. They go to Glassdoor, they go to Indeed, and those things have ratings, right? So on a 1 to 5 scale, they'll give you an overall rating of that company. And if you see a 2.5, that's not middle of the road. That's actually puts you in the bottom quartile of organizations. And then you look at, would you recommend it to a friend? I saw one the other day after a client was approaching us, right? And so I always go into Glassdoor to see what they look like. and it was like a 2.4, but the recommendation was 13%. They would 13% of the people would actually recommend it. So the culture, how people feel it on the inside, is suddenly projected to the outside through these apps that kids are, or not kids, but new workers are using. So now more than ever, you really have to manage that culture if you're going to be successful in bringing new people in.
There you go. So we have one question that just popped in here a second ago. It says, you spoke in detail about how culture affects retention, but how does Denison know how high attrition can affect culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's certainly a kind of cyclical process that exists between retention and culture, especially as attrition gets higher and worse and worse and worse. I mean, we right now are working with some clients who are experiencing turnover that requires them to hire 2 people for every person they hope to retain. It's incredibly expensive. However, it also means that they're funneling in more and more new people over time. At the same time, in doing that, those new people don't know the new culture, the culture of the organization. They have to become familiar with it, but by the time they do, they leave again. And so there's this effect that then also plays on the culture, right? Where the people who potentially were satisfied working at your organization in that moment, they see the turnover, but they also experience the stressors of the turnover, right? You're less efficient when you're constantly churning through new employees, and that creates more work environment stress. And so retention itself can also harm culture in a way that then worsens retention even further. And you find yourself in this very slippery slope on your way kind of down the culture spectrum. And that just continues to be exacerbated until you kind of find the right band-aid or the right solution to that. Ultimately, the further that goes and the worse those issues become, to Jay's point, those things are broadcasted today out into the world through platforms like Glassdoor. And so now your attraction ability is also harmed by that. And so there can certainly be this almost kind of death spiral that organizations experience when they don't get a handle early on their culture or their retention issues.
I think that's a great point. I think that forewarned is forearmed kind of motto there. So catch it before it really gets to a critical turning point. Great information. We have a new question, and it says, how are other companies providing flexibility for employees who work on the production lines? That's a great question. We talked about flexibility overall. Can you all expand a bit more on, it looks like their production lines is the area of focus here.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, not an area where telework's really an option, right? And so identifying flexibility can be a little bit more difficult in this space. However, we have a lot of clients that are achieving this in a variety of ways. The most common, and I'm sure one that most people here have seen before, is a kind of 4x4 work week. Or a 4x10 work week. You work 4 days for 10 hours each for 40 hours, and it gives you an initial day back into your weekend, or alternatively, some organizations place that extra day in the middle of the week, which creates a little bit more separation in the week and allows for kind of better flexibility during the week, but also gives a kind of break in between the 2 chunks of the week employees work. It minimizes stress in the work environment, another important factor, again, of kind of broader turnover. Another, I think, really valuable option is shift swapping. Many employees are capable of shift swapping, and in some of our client organizations have shown their ability to even manage that process themselves, and allowing themselves flexibility they achieve together when it matters. And so this is an incredibly important one, for example, for parents, where you may not need to swap a shift until something very sudden comes up. And so it's about that in the moment flexibility versus flexibility by design, like a 4x10 work week. And so there are a lot of different ways you can create flexibility by design versus that temporary, I need flexibility in this moment. Both of those are incredibly important, though.
But also keep in mind, Katrina, that all gets thrown out the window when you start experiencing that churn, that turnover rate, right? Because
right.
what happens then is somebody's got to cover. And so overtime comes into play. And then that whole flexibility kind of gets thrown out the window because now you're forced to pick up that slack. So that's another argument for getting that culture under control with that flexibility and things like that.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a good point of the more programmatic or systemic types of flexibility and the I need it right in the moment for unforeseen reasons flexibility.
Yeah.
Unforeseen reasons, to your point, can be an individual worker, but it could also be the company if you've got these other turnover problems. So we've got another question coming in. Because you talked a lot about strategic alignment and how do we handle situations where employees feel disconnected from the strategic goals? So what are some ideas of things people can do, I guess, if their employees don't feel connected to those strategic goals?
Yeah, for something like that, basically what you want to do is, to me, is always get people excited, get them to understand how what they do connects, to where the organization wants to go, right? So, what I like to see, and an example I saw from a plant manager in Battle Creek, Michigan, right? This person was one plant in the part of like a 70 plant packaging company. They were the bottom of the barrel. I mean, we're talking an average culture score across the indices of 7, right? Not a lot going on. This person takes over. They want to start implementing lean practices, right? But he has to get the union on board because, when they hear the word lean, they automatically think layoffs, right? And that's not what it was about. What this person was looking to do was to create a high performance plant that the corporate company could depend on to send work to. But also, if you're a high performance plant, you're going to build, you're going to grow. So as he went out to employees, he started talking about what it meant for this organization to develop those lean practices. And he said, in fact, what we're looking to do is grow the business. And if we grow, we hire. And if we hire, those will be your friends and family. So our job here at the plant is to create jobs for the city of Battle Creek. And as a culture guy, I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, that's beautiful, right? He took something as mundane as building boxes, packaging, and things like that, and created purpose for the employees. And that came also in parts of creating these great quality teams that were completely employee-led. There's a lot of things that were going on, but that purpose and getting people to connect it to something that's very important for somebody that lives in a city in Michigan, right? That it wasn't just about making boxes. We provide jobs for the city of Battle Creek. So to me, creating that sense of purpose and connecting people to the strategy, to the vision, to the mission of the organization is incredibly important. And it can be done no matter what industry you're in.
That's a great point because creates a personal connection, not just here's a cascade of corporate metrics connection. They get that, they understand that, they don't disagree with that, but making it more personal is a great way to create that strategic alignment.
One of the other things that I thought was cool about what he had done, this is also, by the way, a private equity owned organization, right? So all employees ever heard was EBITDA, EBITDA, EBITDA. And, the plant manager told me, he's like, they don't understand that. They don't have a connection to that. But what he created was like a 5-point model with things like safety, quality, waste, delivery, things that would resonate with them, that they felt that they could control. And that's what they tracked, right? And he knew if they did all of those right, then EBITDA would come, right? And they did it. That organization went from like an average of 7 percentile, which to us would be a donut of doom, right? An inner ring of color. He took that out within 18 months to like the 71st percentile. Had most of his indices were in the 3rd and 4th quartile. And also they went from below organization company metrics to above average company metrics and became like the the star of the company. Everybody was looking at them to see what did they do, right? So
That's awesome. And an excellent segue actually to our next topic, which is around better quality in manufacturing equals better quality and safety. So better culture gives you better quality and safety. Austin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Katrina. So again, diving into some of these key pieces that directly connect to profitability, there's a very strong connection between culture and the cost of quality, but also culture and safety. You can see in this chart, for example, an almost inflection point where culture for this organization was really kind of going downhill, and the impact that that had on quality was not necessarily immediate, but drastic once it happened. Cost of quality in and of itself is a very crucial metric for manufacturers. It encompasses expenses related to preventing, detecting, and addressing those quality issues. And for some organizations can eat into easily 25% of their overall profit. And so an incredible way to really understand some of those key levers you have on your own profitability, again, through culture as the driver. A lower cost of quality results in enhanced profit margins, but also there's a customer satisfaction component of that as well that really matters for broader growth as well. Quality parts shipped to lack of quality in a part that's shipped to a client immediately harms the reputation that you have in the actual business market. Those things can be irreparable. And so quality in and of itself is not just something that matters for profitability, but matters for reputation to your actual customers, to the people that you deliver those products to. Our research shows that manufacturers with strong cultures have 3 times lower cost of quality and 5 times fewer errors or incidents that lead to scrapped materials. And so Jay mentioned earlier, kind of what are some of those metrics that employees understand, know, and can care about. Scrapped waste is an incredible metric to help people understand not just the financial impact on the company, but the true waste of materials and of possible products that could have gone out to a customer. And so a very clear connection here between culture and the cost of quality, and seeing that a declining culture can really create negative effects for your overall quality. Very similarly, on the next slide, we'll look at a similar connection between culture and safety. A lot of the things which we'll get to here in just a moment that drive quality issues also drive safety issues. And so understanding these two in tandem is incredibly important, but also understanding that safety in and of itself can create very high costs that, again, eat into the overall profitability of a company. Safety performance is crucial, not just for financial performance, but also for employee well-being, for talent retention, for operational efficiency. So there are a lot of aspects of safety that are really important beyond profitability itself as well. Our research shows that strong culture organizations in the top quartile of manufacturers experience 6 times fewer reportable cases and 5 times fewer LTA cases than manufacturers in the bottom quartile. 82% of the top quartile manufacturers we looked at had 0 LTA cases throughout that year. And so there's an incredible impact, a very strong relationship here between an effective culture and safety outcomes that matter for the top of the company all the way down to the floor of a manufacturing plant. And very similarly, then, we want to look at what some of those key aspects of culture are that really matter for quality and safety. One that's going to emerge here again is strategic alignment. Production employees are motivated when they feel like they're part of the company's strategic direction, which is best achieved through engagement by plant managers. Jay just gave a really great story about how exactly that you can do this, connecting something that matters to that workforce, that it might not be as tangible to other people in the company, but something like the success of the community you live in is very tangible to the people who you need to connect to that strategy. That motivation drives care, drives intention around the quality that every person contributes to on the floor. Agreement of goals, involving production employees in setting collective strategic goals and seeking their feedback leads again to higher motivation and quality standards. When people agree about the goals of the right way to achieve an outcome like quality, they're much more likely to be successful in doing so, but they're more motivated to do so as well. Coordination and information sharing. Well-informed and connected production teams adapt better to changes and prioritize not just their own safety, but each other's safety, and emphasizes the importance of trust and collaboration. Employees who do not trust each other or who lack camaraderie together are much less likely to look out for each other's safety. At the same time, if they lack the ability to coordinate effectively, if they don't get the information they need to know the right way to engage in safe practices, the intention of not harming your fellow employee may not matter if you don't know the right way to avoid those scenarios in the first place. Continuous learning and improvement. Engaging production employees in continuous improvement processes and providing that ongoing training they need leads to higher levels of innovation, but also improved safety. Employees are not only meant to kind of be part of an activity that is engaged around quality or safety, they're meant to inform the activity, right? They're meant to inform the processes themselves. It's their knowledge about the way they work that's most valuable in a continuous learning and improvement process. The last one being consistency, and really about the balance between consistency and strategically improving operations, that kind of continuous improvement perspective, where you want to continue to drive forward your quality standards and you want to change your operations in ways that do that for you. But if you do that too quickly, if you do it without strategic alignment, if you do it and you don't communicate it well, you're actually creating risks from a safety perspective. You're changing the consistency of day-to-day tasks, you're creating confusion around existing processes. All of those things lead to more accidents, which lead to worsened safety records, worse profit margins.
Fascinating information. So again, quick reminder, if you've got a question, please add it into the Q&A feature in Zoom. And I think we have some stuff coming in. We do. Okay. Let me go back to, yes, this slide. Jay, this might be a good question for you. What are the common characteristics of manufacturers that had 0 LTA cases? I think everybody, the bottom stat on this slide, I think really jumps out at people in terms of, you know, the holy grail of getting to 0 LTA cases. So what can you tell us about the characteristics of the ones that do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like back in 2011, I conducted a study on 85 North American plants, right? Looking at that. And that's where a lot of what you're referring to comes from. And it is culture. I mean, people call it a safety culture, but it's really your culture. And it's got to be a we type of environment, not just a me environment. So the things that I see, not only in, you know, from a culture perspective, but just a general caring for the organization, for people, things of that nature. I like, for example, just to give you an example, because I got a lot of stories, right? I'm in a plant in Ohio. It's not even I'm in a plant. I'm actually in an offsite with the executive team. And this is probably about 600 to 800 people. I'm with the president, CFO, CHRO, and things like that. They've got, like, once again, a donut of doom. And the president of the organization actually came to me during a break and said, "Hey, Jay, you know, could you take the results and pull out the hourly? Because it's possible that maybe they just didn't understand that maybe these concepts are way over their head." You know, and I was like, really? You know, I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, right? Oldsmobile, you know, at the time. These people are smart people. And I knew that if I pulled it out, it wasn't going to change. But the fact that, you know, he had asked me that told me a lot about how he saw people. And he wasn't a we leader, he was a me leader. And, you know, so while we were there and we resumed, I just asked the executive staff, you know, how many LTAs do you have? Because I did that study, right? And I knew that on the various, as you go up, in culture, the safety record gets a lot better. So I knew that it couldn't have been that good. Not one of them could answer that. Not one of them could answer that. And just to compare it to places I've been in really, really good safety organizations, right? And there, you know, it's not a priority. It's not just a poster on the wall. It's a core value, right? Because priorities change, but values don't. And so for them, I thought it was really interesting because as you got to know that organization, you understood it wasn't just about safety that day or safety that year. We're always looking at records, you know, where are we going to fall? They were actually concerned with your safety 30 years down the road or 5 years after you retire. They would not put you in a position to be in an environment that could affect you adversely later on in life and things like that. So to me, really the core characteristics are, you know, things around, you want to see leadership commitment, right? You want to see open communication where we can call each other out on it. You have to be very comfortable telling your boss, you need that hard hat or you need those glasses on, you know, things like that. You need employee involvement, right? You can't just force a process down on people, right? And there was a guy at OSHA I'd met when I did that study with from the state of Michigan, OSHA program, you know, and he was telling me that, you know, you want the employees to come up with it. It may take a little bit longer, right? You may 3-5 days, but they'll probably get where you want them to go. But the key is they will own it once they get there, and they will then police it, right? So, you know, that's one of the key things, employee involvement, proactivity, right? Being proactive, being able to monitor your results, right? Near misses, learn from your LTAs. Yeah, it's unfortunate if one happens, but do you learn from it? And from that, you can be proactive and watching out for future ones. And then, you know, some of my, you know, favorites is, you know, and the key to it all is holding people accountable. What happens? What happens when someone doesn't work safely? They know the rules, you get them out there in your little safety principles and things like that. But what happens if they disregard those? That's one of the other keys as well. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You know, I think it's all these things, there's lots of facets to it, and it's not a one and done. It's the continued engagement part, I think, is what's really important. You can say it once, but that doesn't necessarily change things. Saying it and then living it, to your point, is key. We've got probably one more really quick question we could do in this section if you all want to take it. This one is interesting. How does the Denison data show a connection between safety and retention?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's probably a you question, Austin.
Yeah, no, that is a great question, and very kind of similar to the idea of culture and retention, and the idea that something like safety can impact retention, but retention can also impact safety. And there's kind of a cyclical relationship there, right? Where if you have high safety incidences, people are more likely to leave. People don't want to work in an unsafe working environment, and they're going to choose a safer working environment when they have that choice. And so high levels or low levels of safety overall, high LTAs, for example, cause people to leave because of those same issues. People who experience an LTA case are much more likely to leave within the year afterwards as well, for example. People really want to live and work in a safe working environment. And so the connection there to retention is incredibly important. At the same time, retention can also negatively affect safety if you're losing people really quickly, right? Again, you have more and more new people coming in that are not as well trained, don't have the same level of experience as someone who's been there for, say, 3 to 5 years. And so they're more likely to get hurt. They're more likely to accidentally hurt somebody else, right? And so there, again, there's a very cyclical relationship there where something like safety could be the initial trigger to a broader attrition issue. and that might double down onto the safety issue even further. And so again, you can find yourself in a very slippery slope in that way. An incredibly important message about kind of balancing these things, but also being proactive about them. Once you find yourself on that slippery slope, it's incredibly hard to turn around.
Yeah,
That
that's
totally
fascinating.
reminds me, if a real world experience, I'm up in a smaller plant in Wisconsin, right? And we're in the little boardroom and whatnot. And there's this huge factory across the street. Now, the place I'm at, really decent culture. I mean, a really good culture. We were in there doing leadership coaching and things like that. But as I looked out the window, there's this big plant, right? And they were telling me it was on the top 10 OSHA hit list, that they had safety fines just coming out the window, right? But they would literally disregard those fines for the sake of production, right? And it's like that, once again, it comes down to that me versus we, right? They didn't take care of their employees. So the guy was saying, yeah, he goes, man, that's like a revolving door of employees over there. But great example of that, Austin.
Yeah, which gets expensive quickly. And to both of your points before, word gets out, whether it's in the neighborhood coffee shop, the digital coffee shop of Glassdoor and other sites where this information gets shared, and it definitely has an impact. So why don't we move on then into our last topic for today, which is really around digital transformation, because it's a topic for a lot of manufacturers today and the role that culture plays in that. So Austin, let's head back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So for our last topic, digitalization, this has become an incredibly hot topic within the industry, particularly coming out of the pandemic. Things like Internet of Things, digital twin designs, more advanced data analytics, caring about the data acumen of the people on the floor themselves and how they use data to make better decisions. All of those things becoming much more important. At the same time, successful digitalization can drive an incredible profit margin. It can even drive revenue growth even further, right? But at the same time, we've seen many unsuccessful digitalization efforts that actually harm profitability, that negatively or adversely affect costs of quality or even safety. Again, going back to the balance of kind of doing things effectively and strategically instead of the kind of whiplash that you might create strategically for people on the floor. Digitalization is an incredibly easy place to create that kind of whiplash. More broadly in general, digital leaders in the industry achieve nearly 2 times higher earning growth. So we do know that digitalization is incredibly important for profitability, for growth. However, 70% of those transformations fail, with the number one reason being a lack of people integration into that technology. And so there's a very high reward. There's an incredibly high risk as well. And so the gamble that you're taking is incredibly important to then manage along the way. And so the way that you approach a digitalization effort has to be culture driven. It has to have people integration at the forefront of it. On the next slide, we'll look at what these 4 key kind of people integration or cultural components of a digitalization effort really are required for a successful final outcome. The first is that people understand the digitalization effort as a strategy. Are we simply reducing headcount? And is that a strategy that people can get behind? Or are you communicating a strategy that creates resistance to digitalization? So the first step is having people who are bought in, who want to see the digitalization effort succeed. There are an incredible amount of stories of people actively fighting against digitalization because they perceive it as a threat and not something that can improve their livelihood or can improve the way they work. The next one is that they receive the right reskilling that they need towards those technological capabilities. Very often, there are a lot of initial assumptions about what reskilling looks like, what skills are needed in the first place. It's not often driven by the people who need those skills. And so, again, going back to kind of putting people right at the front of that, identifying what those right skills are, pivoting within the broader transformation process to make sure they're gaining those new skills is incredibly important. people who drive digitalization efforts, who embed entire new technological systems, but then have a workforce who does not know how to use them, ultimately are worse off. They're less efficient because of it. They drive up safety record issues, all of those things. And so not only having people on board, but knowing the skills they need and attaining them at the right time is incredibly important. They also need to be embedded into existing human processes. If I have to learn a new technology and a new process at the same time, I'm much more likely to bow out. Part of that belongs to the kind of realm of familiarity and comfort. One day it completely changed not only the technologies I interact with, but the way I do so. And it's as though my entire job has changed. And so again, going back to that almost pragmatic movement that you need to really keep people involved, engaged, and on the right track requires you to at least embed as much as possible those existing human processes into those new technologies as often as you can. The last one, technological advancements being pragmatic and people-driven. This is kind of the through line of all four of these. You won't know the best skills or the right skills that every single person on the floor needs during a digitalization effort. You won't know beforehand, and you may know afterwards if done successfully, but many people go through digitalization efforts and learn that at the end, people just lack the skills altogether. At the same time, going back to kind of digitalization effort as a strategy, people are bought in when they're the drivers of the vehicle, right? And so making sure that people understand that they're at the forefront of the strategy, they're not subject to it, right? They are driving it themselves is an incredibly important way to maintain that buy-in. And then the kind of embedding into human processes, allowing people to drive the process itself, allowing them to put flags down to say these things cannot change and here's why, is an incredibly important way of developing something that meets your strategic goals, but also is realistic about what's happening on the ground. I can't tell you how many times we see digitalization efforts where the organization has very, very high hopes and expectations for a population who's saying there's way too much happening way too quickly and we're not prepared for it, and they're not listened to, right? So not only does that just mean that the digitalization effort might fail, but it also now means that people might leave because of it as well. And so having it be people driven is an incredibly important part of the overall success of any digitalization effort.
Wow, fascinating information. We have another slide here.
Yeah,
too.
and
Yes.
then this is just a general idea of some of those key areas and where they're represented within our model. And you can see an example on the right-hand side of an organization tracking through multiple phases of a digitalization effort on these key areas. So is the workforce involved in the reskilling process? Are they getting the necessary skills that they need? Are leaders giving the workforce the direction that it needs? And is the workforce aligned with the strategic goals of the effort? It's through the alignment to strategic goals, it's through getting direction from your leaders that you're able to get the skills that you need in the first place and know how to identify them. You can see in the very first phase of this digitalization effort where people were just being introduced into the new technologies. They weren't really in application yet. And you can see a little bit of overconfidence on the has necessary skills, but very, very clear low scores on whether they're involved in the process itself, whether they're being guided by leaders, and whether they really understand the strategy behind that effort. And you can see the impact of that in phase 2, where they go to start using these things and they realize there was a lot they didn't know about how they would use them, the processes that would exist. And all of that was really driven by the fact that they weren't being used to inform that process in the first place. And so we saw an initial drop in the skills that they needed. However, in tracking through multiple phases, their actual culture, we were able to see this problem emerge and address it immediately through these other factors, which you can see immediately had a very strong effect on the has necessary skills measure. People were much more confident in their ability to use those technologies, and at the same time became more aligned with the strategic goals of that digitalization effort as it rolled out. And so it's an important thing to consider as well, that it's not just starting at that point and having all of these things down. It's about achieving it through the process itself, and knowing that digitalization efforts, usually being multi-pronged, being targeted in different areas of an organization, need direct tracking, and they need this level of consistency and insight through the process, not simply a before and after. You have to track those things every step of the way to achieve the outcome that you're looking for.
That's fascinating. I love this line chart on the bottom right with the Denison culture scores. I guess I think the important thing is sometimes people will do a survey at the beginning of these projects and then kind of weigh maybe at the end. And I love the clients we have that use it as a proactive guide throughout, because that really lets you get the business performance impacts of these digital transformation efforts faster, I think.
Okay.
I've done a lot of those in my life, and I can tell you everyone wants to talk about the technology, and I'm like, it's the people that will make this work or not work. And you really see that in this line chart. So quick reminder to everybody, if you have some questions, please do type them in the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer them. And if we run out of time, we will try to get back to you afterwards. I think these are really interesting and fascinating analyses, because manufacturers, I think, often do digital transformation projects in various parts of the company or various parts of a plant at different points in time. So you don't do a digital transformation and you're done. There's always more to do. And so that's why I think some of this information is so incredibly powerful. So we do have a question coming in. Hold on here. It says, how do Denison clients typically track the success of their digitalization efforts? Are there clear outcome measures that can show the success? So I think that's getting back to this slide, where you don't want to be in the 70% failure bucket. How do you get in that 30% success bucket and get those 2x higher earnings? So Austin, that might be a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great question. And again, part of it is certainly measuring the culture itself and these key elements we're talking about. But from an outcomes perspective, you first have to take a step back and say, why am I going through this effort in the first place? What are the outcomes that I'm trying to affect in the first place? And at the same time, what are some possible unintended consequences that could exist as well, right? And so some of the very same business metrics you already use, like cost of quality, like LTAs, are a really effective way to understand some of the impact of the digitalization effort. If the outcome goal of the effort is efficiency, for example, then you need to beforehand have productivity measures in place, right? And so it's really about, what are you seeking to affect in the first place? What could be affected tangentially along the way? And let's track those things phase by phase as well. And so being on top of, we see clients who, from their own internal metrics, update their metrics monthly. We also have clients who rush to update their internal data and metrics on things like productivity at the end of every year, specifically for annual reporting. I can tell you that organizations who do it monthly are much more adaptable during a digitalization effort, because they know in any given moment as they go through that process, oh, wait, we've accidentally created this issue over here, and look at what's happening to the safety metrics in that group, right? That's how you know throughout, but also at the end of a digitalization effort, whether or not you've attained success. You have to know what you're achieving or you're trying to achieve through the effort in the first place.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think it's always a journey, these transformation projects, isn't it? It takes some time.
Well, something like this too, digitalization, that's a new process. People hate change, just generally hate change, right? So to me, like, you got to, they got to understand the why. Why do we need to do that? Create that sense of urgency, create that vision of what life will be like afterward, and I think that kind of shows it a little bit, the involved in the process, right? The more people get involved and they start seeing how it will affect their lives, that slope just keeps going up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've touched on, Jay, here. We have another question coming in. What are the insights from the Denison data sets related to that 70% of transformations failing? And I think you mentioned some of it was the alignment of things. I don't know, we talked a little bit about these cultural attributes. Do you have any other stories, Jay, that you could share around some of those? Like, why do they fail for things that people might not expect contribute to their failure?
Well, I don't have any necessarily for digitalization or anything like that, but it's just getting people to change, right? And it goes back to a plant that I'd worked with in terms of bringing in new ways of processes and new ways of doing things, and they're out on the floor, right? And so one of the things that the plant manager wanted to do is he just didn't want to just drop it on everybody, right, all at once. They wanted to take a couple of areas within the facility and implement it there first, right? And it kind of goes back to that, seeing, that reason for change. And what they found was that as people watched those areas improve and get the benefits of what the implementation was, the guy plant manager was telling me, Jay, I had guys that have been here for 30 years that are just here counting down retirement, suddenly ask, hey, how can I implement that in my area and things like that? And, that's kind of how you do it. It's maybe not all hard and fast. It's, testing it out in certain areas of the organization. Because a lot of times, like we worked with IBM Global Consulting a while ago, right? And they would be doing these ERP implementations. And what they found was, if they just tried to hit it on the whole organization, it wasn't going to work very well. So they were using our culture model as a readiness for change, knowing that the high-performing cultures were probably going to be more accepting of new ways of doing things. So they would plot these dashboards out of the whole organization, and they would start them in those high-performing and then kind of pull everybody toward them and stuff.
And you got seeing is believing, right? As the saying
Sure.
goes. So
At the end of the
excellent
day.
point. We have one more question coming in. I think we probably have time for. It was mentioned earlier that too much change at once can negatively affect safety. Talked a fair amount about that. Yep. Has Denison seen examples where digitalization efforts have directly affected safety in a plant or with a workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. One of arguably kind of the bigger risks of digitalization and safety is the mismatch between technology and the person trying to use it. Sometimes digitalization is something as simple as automating shifting for schedules, right? And it's something that people need to learn, and there's a new process around, but it's not directly about the hands I put on the machines I use, the products that I'm creating, right? But sometimes digitalization is about the machines themselves. Sometimes it's about the equipment I use while I'm, for example, doing quality inspection. And when the digitalization effort is directly applicable to the actions I take with my bare hands as a production employee, you immediately create that safety risk. And so again, when we're talking about the pragmatic movement, when you have people who are, when you have processes that are people driven, they will tell you when you're moving too quickly. People feel unsafe often before safety incidences occur, right? I know I'm moving too quickly. I know that I don't actually have my hands around the new process that I'm trying to understand as well as I'd like to. And so importantly, people will let you know when that mismatch exists, when there are concerns about safety, and it's about the people-driven aspect that emerges that information in the first place. Jay made a really good point earlier about pushing something down onto everybody versus allowing them to build it and push it up to you. When you push something like this down on everybody, they will be much less likely to tell you when there's a problem, and there will be higher safety incidences because of it. And so the people-driven aspect is really the most important way of mitigating any effects that a digitalization effort might have on safety itself.
Those are great points. And again, I think, the we not me culture, right, Jay, that you talk about, like go talk to the people closest to it and they'll tell you. So
You good? Yeah.
yeah, well, and I think that's important too, because all of these digital transformation endeavors start with some business outcome that you're trying to get to, like you mentioned, Austin. And so the clock starts ticking, right, on achieving those. So what can you do to make sure that you hit those marks in the time frame intended, or even maybe better? All comes down to how you engage the people in the process more than anything else. So great, great comments. We'll see if we have any other questions. Please feel free to type them into the Q&A. We might have time for one more. Let's see. That was close to one we already talked about. Okay, how about, I think I understand this one. Let's try this one. Strategic alignment appeared as a clear driver of every business metric discussed today. That's true. It comes up a lot. How effective is the typical manufacturer at achieving that strategic alignment compared to other industries that Denison works in? So how does manufacturing stack up on strategic alignment? I guess is how that question is going. Austin, that might be one for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely correct. A good observation. Strategic alignment really comes to play in every single one of these. And a huge part of that's about creating motivation in the first place, creating a sense of direction that people want to buy into and be a part of, right? Getting the bottom up approach requires people to be motivated towards something in the first place. And so alignment to the strategy is incredibly important. We look at kind of industries as they stack up against our global benchmark is a good way to understand how do they compete overall. On average, they're just below the average of our benchmark. However, you can see kind of as you look across the most effective versus some of the less effective manufacturers that we have manufacturing organizations that are in those top quartiles. But on average, we really see that they're pretty average in their ability to align people to a strategy or to create strategic clarity within the organization. One thing that you'll see in some of the future articles that come out in this campaign is really about a kind of blind spot in that area, though, in this industry, where manufacturers have not only been good at, but have become more and more successful at creating strategic clarity and really making clear what that direction is and starting to get that buy-in. That's really, really important. However, where they lack and where they continue to kind of stagnate is in the ability to connect that to the goals and tasks of the people all the way down to the bottom of the floor. Again, part of that's about what's people driven versus what's top down, what's kind of directed by the strategy itself. Part of it is there's a huge role that leaders play at that local level as well. They need to know the strategy and understand that connection to goals before their team even has a shot at it. And so there's a huge disconnect between creating that strategic clarity, which manufacturers have over the last 5 to 10 years gotten much, much better at, and actually connecting that to goals that will actually create the outcomes of that strategy that you care about in the first place. And so fairly average overall in strategic clarity, but growing, but really missing that key successful piece where the rubber kind of hits the pavement, which is people knowing what tasks to do and prioritize and how to do them in a way that aligns to the strategy.
Yeah, I wonder if the gap that you talk about is you hear it a lot when you're in manufacturing, us versus them, floor versus office, and you wonder, does that cause that? And that goes back to we, right? It's all of us. We all have a stake in the success of this organization. But to give, manufacturing credit, man, it's like, I've just always been impressed. They gravitate toward this stuff because it's a metric. And with process improvement, continuous improvement, all of these Kaizen, all of these things, it's no wonder they gravitate toward it, right? Because, you've got process improvement, but the model really is a people improvement and a roadmap of how to improve it. And what we know is if you improve your metrics, we got data. I mean, you showed this first slide, right? With the EBITDA and the sales growth. We've got those types of things for safety, quality, return on equity. It goes on and on and on. It just shows you that culture has a huge impact on performance. So
That's awesome. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it with that today, but lots of good ideas. Hopefully we've sparked some inspiration in some of our attendees today. And of course, you're welcome to contact us. We'd be happy to talk with you in more detail about any of the things we covered today or other things going on in your organization. A couple quick reminders. Our 2024 Global Forum event is coming up, being held virtually in October for 3 hours each day. So get ready, mark your calendars. We're going to have the registration invite coming soon. It's going to be a fantastic event, really inspiring speakers, really insightful conversations, and it's a great time to give yourself in terms of both creating inspiration and some things that can move the needle in your business directly. So we hope you will join us. And as always, please follow Denison Consulting on LinkedIn. If you don't today, that's how you find out about these amazing analyses that we have going on. And of course, visit our website for more details, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you about how we can help you use culture to accelerate your business performance improvement or sustain it to get ahead of the competition. So that wraps us up for today. Many thanks, Jay and Austin. Great details and information as always. And again, thank you all for joining us, and we wish you all the best. Have a great day.
thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.